Hello, all you fellow dusty dogs and travelers of the trail out there, and welcome to another episode of D.I.Yote Bites, a bite-sized audio podcast-style series where I ramble for a bit about me, my life, and my interests. On today's episode, I'll talk a little about my love of roller coasters, and focus on a particular incident where interest and anxious reality clashed. Enjoy! My family mostly lives in Southern California, but a few of them have spread themselves out for work or other reasons. My uncle, his wife, and two of my cousins live up in the San Jose area of Northern California, nearly a 7-hour drive away from where we are. We used to take trips up there during the summer to see them. These were also punctuated with drives further north for stops in San Francisco, another cousin who lived in the region of Napa Valley, and the occasional day trip into the state capital of Sacramento. Related. I've always had a love of roller coasters. I loved going to amusement parks around our home. We're less than an hour away from both Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm, as well as a few small local establishments, and I could ride the coasters there pretty often. I also love the game Roller Coaster Tycoon, and remember it being one of the first games I ever played. I never did very good at the game initially, but it was quite fun to build rides and make parks. I saved maps of amusement parks we went to and would try and replicate the park when I got home on my computer, even if I never did a terribly good job at mimicking the track layouts. I still sometimes search online for maps that I can potentially convert into amusement parks on Planet Coaster, a similar game with a slightly more realistic layout editor. Northern California is home to 3 major amusement parks, conveniently all within about an hour of the family we go to visit. Santa Clara had California's Great America, RIP, about to close soon. West of Santa Clara has the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, and Vallejo, closer to San Francisco, is home to Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. I was not as aware of parks outside of my home area, so when I learned about them in my 20s, I thought I was finally ballsy enough to ride some of the more extreme thrills around there. So, a few years before the pandemic, my uncle revealed their family had yearly passes to Great America, which was almost literally 10 minutes away from their home. He took a day off work, the cousins and the wife were done with the school year, and they used their guest passes for us to get into Great America. Our visit was condensed for a few reasons. One, few of the family members wanted to go on the carnival rides, things like carousels and other things you can find at almost any park or even at state fairs. Two, the true benefit of touring to a park like this so far from home is to check out the roller coasters, the major attractions. Three, it didn't take long for me to discover a problem. The first coaster we went on was Gold Striker, a fast wooden coaster with a smooth track and a twisted layout. I admit to closing my eyes on the first drop, but after that came an exhilarating rush as the ride twists and turns and jumps over and ducks beneath itself. Honestly, one of the best coasters I've ever been on. After that came Grizzly, what is referred to as an out-and-back wooden. The layout wasn't as complicated as it has a few drops in one direction, then turns around and kind of heads back. It does that a couple of times, but nothing really fancy. It's gentle so far as wooden coasters go, gentle enough that even my mom, who has a fear of heights, was able to ride and enjoy it without much issue. Still get speed, just, again, gentler compared to most. Then came the Demon. The Demon was a steel track coaster with over-the-shoulder restraints, which makes the seats look very much like an extra-large version of a child's car seat. Coasters with inversions, where you go upside down, tend to have these restraints as an extra safety measure so that guests don't fall out of the car. The Demon climbs the lift hill, turns around, drops into 2 loops, then shoots through a tunnel before climbing up into the brake run to trim the coaster's speed. Another turn around and it drops again, this time into 2 corkscrews, finishing off with a short spiral helix upwards before hitting another brake run that leads into the station and the loading platform. Almost all the first part of the ride can be seen from the coaster's queue, and almost all of the back half of the ride can be seen from the exit path. This one my mom and my uncle's wife didn't go on, but my uncle went so my cousins could have an adult, and Dad was willing to check it out with me. I think we sat in the queue for almost 50 minutes, and I enjoyed watching the coaster trains leave the station, dip into a little tunnel, and then climb the lift hill and go through the loops before disappearing into the tunnel for the back half. Estimating a train coming by every 3 to 4 minutes or so, I saw about 15 or 16 trains of people go by during the queue time without a shade of apprehension. As we moved through the queue as the trains went by, the prevailing thought was, I'm going to do this. I'm really going to do this. At the front of the queue, I was ushered over to the front car and took one look at the shoulder restraints. It felt like my whole body just shouted, "Nope," all at once. This wasn't some matter of foresight, like there was going to be a problem with the coaster. No final destination premonitions here. The problem lay with me. After spending the whole queue simmering and stewing in wait at the front of the line, it burst to the surface and I was just too damn scared to get on. It was so bad I was shaking and was barely able to tell my dad, I can't do this. There's a certain level of embarrassment that comes with, after having waited nearly an hour to go on a ride, having to simply step across the car and exit off the other side of the platform without ever having gone a lap around the track. I walked down to my mom feeling like I was going to cry. Having been so excited, then needing to back out, it was basically the last possible second. The day ended there. No one in the uncle's family liked what was then called Vortex, a rare coaster type that was mostly spent standing up. And with me having problems with the Demon, Flight Deck, an inverted coaster where the car hangs underneath the track, didn't have enough votes to go on. We were kind of forced to go home early. I felt bad because it felt like my fear of the Demon is what truncated the visit. That if I'd been a little more brave, that maybe we would have gone on Flight Deck. Well, let's just say I thought I was ballsy. A day or two later, the family heads off to the beach town of Santa Cruz for the day. We went during our time with my uncle to go to an outdoor summer concert series held on the beach itself, with full soundstage and some good old-time rock and roll from my dad and uncle's era. There's a street and a pier for us to stroll up and down and check on the stops, my idea of a nice beachside retreat, and a couple of good places to get fudge and ice cream, and the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, an amusement park with plenty of rides and direct access to the beach for the concert series. We arrive a few hours ahead of the performance with the intention of doing exactly as I mentioned. We walked up and down the pier and perused the coastal shops before heading into the amusement park, stage being best access from a point about in the middle. Rides were paid for by tickets, and thus if I wanted to, I could catch a ride or two if I so desired, pick and choose my preference. 3 major roller coasters exist at the boardwalk. One is a gentle kiddie coaster, the second is a steel coaster with some extreme turns called Undertow, and there's also a wooden coaster called the Giant Dipper, officially the oldest coaster in California and one of the oldest operating coasters in the world. Aside from thrills, to ride such a thing and experience a piece of history is a coaster enthusiast's dream. I had seen many videos and read quite a bit of the Giant Dipper's history in my enthusiasm of theme parks and roller coasters, and now had the pleasure of seeing it in person. It would have been better to ride it. But instead I walked up and down the boardwalk without ever purchasing the tickets to ride. The lashing of my embarrassment with the Demon wasn't too far off, and I felt chastened. The most I could do was take photographs of it. A few from the pier and a few from the boardwalk itself. But the photographs could do little justice to it, and none of them I considered good enough to show off. I ended up buying a postcard with the coaster on it instead. A day or so later, we left my uncle and his family and went northward. After spending the day in San Francisco, we made our way out of the city to visit my cousin and his family who live up by the capital of Sacramento. Now, a few days out from my lashing, my parents wondered if there was anywhere I might like to go, and I recommended Six Flags Discovery Kingdom as I felt a little braver. Mom, however, probably more acutely remembered my embarrassment and gave me 3 simple questions. What was the ticket price? What were the coasters there? And were there enough that I'd go on to justify the price? Short answer, no. While there were other reasons to go, so far as I could tell it being part amusement park, part zoo, with a decent amount of animal enclosures, there wasn't enough to justify our going. Even by my standards back then, most of the coasters were rather more intense than the Demon, and quite honestly, I think they've only gotten more so in the time since when introduction of hybrid coasters to the park. I left that vacation only half satisfied. There were plenty of other reasons to enjoy our trip up in the northern part of the state, but the humiliation of the Demon was not easily shaken. I mostly satisfied myself afterwards with videos of the coasters online and trying to duplicate them in Roller Coaster Tycoon. Yet even in videos in the game, some only served as a reminder that I wasn't unable to go on even one of the simpler steel coasters. A year later, my family ventured up north again. My uncle's family made so few visits down that heading upstate was good for both sides to see each other again. The plan was almost exactly the same, though without the visit to Great America. On the other hand, the Santa Cruz Boardwalk was perfectly timed for the summer concert series again, and another band that we were all pretty fond of. So we piled in and headed off to the beach again. The pier and shops had lost none of their delights. But the sound manager for this band was quite different from the last one. While the previous experience was some of the best live quality sound work I've heard, this time I ended up being driven away from the beach and the stage due to what I perceived as a lather-loud bass drum. I've been sensitive to loud noises since I was young, and the throbbing, pounding bass made me literally sick to the stomach. So I left the stage and found it was best to walk up and down the boardwalk within range of the sound, but not so far as to remove the band entirely. The particular spot that afforded that sound vantage point best was close to the entrance of the Giant Dipper. And so, in my pacing the boardwalk, I crossed it many times and found myself frequently stopping in front of the entrance of the old coaster. The band drew a considerable crowd, and the queue had lightened considerably from our first arrival. And furthermore, right there smack dab in front of it, was the kiosk for buying the tickets. Stood there a long moment. There was a part of me that was still unnerved from my experience with the demon. But it almost seemed that, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit much to call it that, but fate had positioned me here. The best sound spot for me was right at the entrance in the ticket stand. Eventually, another reason won out. I kicked myself for not writing it last time. Today would be the day that I would. And last but not least, it would at least waste some time until the band was done playing. I paid $6 for the ticket to ride the Giant Dipper and got in the queue. Line outside the station building was almost empty, so it took me up into a little small rotunda and almost right to the station. I was inside of the loading platform before I got to the back of the line, and ended up being distracted from the coaster trains by a bunch of pictures with captions detailing the ride's history along the wall of the queue. So it was that my wait time was rather shorter than that of the demon, and I was swiftly loaded into the train before my body had a true chance to say no, even in the same spot. Front seat. I am afraid of the dark. The first part of Giant Dipper is a long tunnel. The pitch-black maw gaped at me as I buckled in and I felt the lap restraint come down. I almost immediately wondered if I had made the right decision. The train surged forward and around a corner before I could protest, but down a steady slope, picking up speed as the train yanked me around a few corners. Then in the distance I saw a light ahead and the train crawling towards it. And a few moments later I was rising gently above the boardwalk, above the stage, barely hearing anything but the clacking of the lift hill as the ride descended to the peak. I am also mostly inclined to close my eyes on the first steep drop of most roller coasters. The anticipation of that first drop is definitely the worst. It's the biggest release of the slow tension of the lift hill. Once the train gets rolling, you can be fairly confident it'll make it through the end, as well as never being so high from the ground. But this time I didn't close my eyes, for some reason. I fell into the first drop with the rest of the train, the wind picking up speed as the clacking escalated to a roar. The ride shot up into a bank turn at the far end of the track, then whizzed back down before I could even process it. Next hill was an airtime hill that caused me to float out of my seat, and I shrieked at feeling I was going to fly out of my chair. Then a steep climb and a brake run, and I was finally given a moment to catch my breath. That moment was well-deserved and well-earned. The train gently led into another sweeping turn with a slope again, but this time I was above the station and able to see this boardwalk from pier to end. I was able to see the sun beginning to set at the waterline. The wind was gentle and all sound was lost amidst the wooden clanging of the train. I turned forward again in time to dip into another drop at the bottom and another hill of airtime. Yet now I laughed. The laughter was both one of realization and of fun. Coasters are designed to feel just a little bit out of control. By now, I'd finally accepted the ride's paces and began to treat it more like a bucking bronco that I was trying to break in. My body flowed more easily into the hills, the drops, the curves, and I didn't feel any of the dread that I had first getting on. The fun brought on a realization close to triumph. While the demon had beaten me, the Giant Dipper had, to a certain extent, given me a stepping stone back. Someday I would return and beat the demon. Not possible, again, R.I.P. But for now, I was enjoying both my fun on the coaster and my time on a piece of history. Of course, the coaster is only about 2 minutes long, and so that time was very quickly at an end. Concert was still going as the band played about 2 shows of about 90 minutes in length, and I had plenty of time to walk up and down the boardwalk. Passed the coaster a few more times and checked out a few other rides. I didn't buy any other tickets for them, though. I also accepted watching a few trains of Undertow. I wasn't ready for that one quite yet. It goes up 180 degrees. I mean, you're looking up and down at one point. The cars spin around. I was like, nah, I'm good on that one. But it was easier to accept that loss by acknowledging that a limit had been reached. But I did end up buying a second ride on the Giant Dipper. And when my family notified me that it would stay to hear the band played again, none of them have my noise sensitivity, I pacified myself with going up and down the boardwalk, taking photos, buying some treats, and riding the Giant Dipper no less than 6 times that day. Fear had given way to joy, chastity to excitement, humiliation to fun. And before I left, I even managed to make a face for the on-ride photo and bought a copy as my souvenir. Does this rank me anywhere among coaster enthusiasts? Oh, probably not. But it did teach me a few things. First of all, I proved myself stronger than my fears by coming back and conquering what had originally beaten me. Second was that my love of coasters didn't mean I needed to seek out the most intense. Yet most of all was that I had a lot of fun on the thing. And looking back on it, I am more pleased about riding it than I was of sitting on the sidelines and wishing I could have. Prior to the pandemic, my family often took winter or spring trips to Las Vegas. My grandmother had a love of casinos and buffets, and in her later years, even with dementia before it progressed into Alzheimer's, we could usually convince her to head to the glittering city for some gambling, good food, and a weekend away from family. With family, I mean. I was never a gambler. The one time I legitimately tried, I blew $200 on blackjack, and I found I have a strong dislike of slot machines. And while I like card games, I never brought enough to go to the tables for poker for baccarat. What gave me interest in Las Vegas was the food and the shops. Where my grandmother could not eat her way through a buffet, I certainly could. And there were places that I liked that even my family could tear themselves away from gambling to explore. Like the shops at Caesar's Palace or the indoor canals of the Venetian. Entering around the Chinese New Year celebrations also helps because of the extra decorations. In trying to fill up the days one time, I pointed my way to a casino at the end of the main line they call the Strip. Circus Circus. The primary appeal of Circus Circus was the Adventure Dome that had a small amusement park in it. Rides and games and mini-golf crammed together and stacked on top of each other, hidden away from the desert heat in a giant pink glass dome that casts a, admittedly somewhat gaudy color over everything, even as it shields and mutes the sun. The novelty, I explained to them, was simple. We mostly stayed on the Strip and could walk to pretty much every other casino. This one required some 15 minutes to drive to it, well away from the rest of the more popular ones. But we'd never been, and it would be easy to head up and spend an hour then head back. That was enough, and we headed off for Circus Circus. In truth, I went for another reason. Canyon Blaster, a roller coaster I had seen in searching videos online, and a chance for redemption after my licking with the demon. The coaster's condensed layout still had 2 loops and 2 corkscrews, but in a tighter configuration, and I wanted that chance. My dad ended up casting the deciding vote, saying that he would go with me on the rides and exploring the Adventure Dome, as he was not much into gambling either. I likely would not go back to Circus Circus. Aside from the theme, it's also one of the lesser well-kept casinos and shopping areas, where I felt better in places like the Venetian or the Bellagio. The Adventure Dome was only mildly more well-kept, if only because alcohol didn't seem to be allowed in where I went, so you had to be a little bit more family-friendly. Of course, an odd place like that, a family-friendly park attached to a casino, means the lines for mostly everything were short. Canyon Blaster had basically no one in line and seemed to just run the train so long as there were people willing to go on the ride. So my dad and I also purchased tickets, also freaking ridiculous at $15 each, so $30 for one ride for two of us, to go on the coaster. On the coaster, down a small drop, circle back around, start at the lift hill. I didn't have time to regret my decision at the station, but I began to regret it when we climbed that hill. And I had a good minute or so click, 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 to look over at the twin loops next to me. Up we climbed, and I could hear my dad shouting at me over the noise if I was doing all right. I started to formulate an answer when we were at the top of the hill, dropping down another small drop, and then staring those loops in the face. Down the drop and into the first loop is when the panic really set in. I remember screaming out, "Oh shit!" but it was stopping midway through the first loop to catch my breath, so the effect is, "Oh shit! It!" But there was no time for that panic to actually stay. We'd finished the loop and we were already sweeping into the second one. But again, that panic turned to laughter as I realized I'd actually finally gotten through my first looping coaster. Swinging around at the far end for the corkscrews, I barely nearly wanted to raise my hands, but they were in a death grip on the restraint bars, doing a white knuckle. But I held in there, and we whipped through them into a small helix before the train makes a final turn into the station. I won't lie, I did feel a little lightheaded and disoriented after the ride. Enough that my dad and I spent the next couple of minutes sitting on a bench, then went off to find something to drink and snack on just so I could get a little bit of my energy back. Gave me time to walk around the Adventure Dome a little more, too. Once again, there was another ride there with a couple of inversions, but I figured I was pushing my limit considering it was my first time, and I very knowingly refused to ride that one. I did manage a second ride on Canyon Blaster, though. Still couldn't put my hands up, but it did make me feel better that I managed to finally face and overcome that fear of the demon. And while I might be taking it a little slower in the future, I can at least say that I can, and that I have. Yet something remains. The taste of the thrill was enough to desire a second helping. I now hope that I may soon be able to indulge in it again. And that has been your bite-sized nugget of storytelling for today. I hope you enjoyed it and amused you as much as it amuses me. If you liked hearing me ramble, hit the like button on the video and hit subscribe to be notified when the next bite-sized episode comes out. You can also support the series by donating to my Ko-fi page, kofi.com/D.I.Yote_gaming, and showing interest in further episode creation. But for now, it's time for me to head out. So until we meet again on these dusty trails, have a howling good day. Take care.